And I thought I knew poverty on the south side and west side of Chicago, but on that reservation, the unemployment rate was 70%. And the high school that we visited, talked to the teachers, they could remember one student in the past 6 years, one student going on to college. So how do we ever create opportunity there where failure is the norm? And so there's a number of things that we have to do to increase the quality of education in disadvantaged communities, particularly in Indian reservations. One, and this is where we have to partner in very creative ways with the FCC and with the Department of Agriculture. Having much greater access to technology is huge. There's a young man I've stayed in touch with who was extraordinarily bright, who was a freshman there, who was just begging for higher level opportunities and didn't feel challenged. So making sure if they aren't offered in school, but online, chances to take AB classes, chances to get college credit while in high school is hugely important. Another huge challenge is how we get great teachers and great principals to stay and serve in those communities. What I heard repeatedly is a constant turnover. Teachers go for a couple years, build their resumes, and move on. So thinking creatively about teacher housing, thinking creatively about using some of these school improvement grants to pay teachers more to work in underserved communities. And what I can't emphasize enough is while Race to the Top has gotten all the press, and that's fine, $4 billion there, we're putting $4 billion behind the bottom 5% of schools. It's a massively disproportionate investment. And whatever it takes, we want folks to do. So if it takes 10 grand or 15 grand or 20 grand to get a great science teacher to work in an underserved community or a disadvantaged community on an Indian reservation, do it. If it takes 50 grand to pay a great principal to go serve in that community, do that. If you need more time for teachers to plan and work together, use those resources to do that. If students should be in school 10, 12, 14 hours a day, do that. So resources were put on the table. What we need now is creativity and courage at the local level. And we think not just in Indian country, but in rural communities and remote communities and inner city communities, you're going to see a level of innovation, creativity that I think will hopefully change the country.
You mentioned your travels last year. I think yesterday you were at the Delaware State Fair.
Friday.
You were at the Delaware State Fair. You were talking about administration outreach towards 4-H, FFA, rural schools, and you just alluded to that in your last question. Are there too many rural school districts? Is consolidation the way to a better education in small towns?
I think that's really a local decision, and I think you have many states who obviously are very, very tough budget times, and thinking through HR practices, thinking through the purchasing of textbooks, thinking through technology, thinking through payroll systems, finding ways to work together to reduce some of those administrative costs to get scarce dollars into classrooms. I think everyone, not just in rural communities, but in urban communities, need to be thinking about how to do more with less. That's the reality. How do we become much more efficient and use technology? How do we use that to drive more productivity in a time of declining revenue? So I think all of us, maybe because of the tough times, it's going to spur a level of innovation, not just in rural communities, but across the board. We all have to find ways to do more of less. That's just the reality. And that's a piece of the equation, but it's much, much larger than that.
We had several questions dealing with grade inflation. One problem teachers face in dealing with underperforming students is pressure from parents to adjust grades upwards. How can teachers enlist the support of parents in the process of educating their children rather than facing such parents as adversaries?
Let me even take it bigger than that. I can't say this strongly enough, is this idea of higher standards, true college and career-ready standards, is an absolute game changer. And what this means by definition is more and more states adopt, and Tennessee's dealing with this right now. By definition, when you raise the bar, guess what? Test scores are going to go down. And that's a hard thing for politicians. That's a hard thing for the public to understand. Our collective challenge is that's the truth. And we have to give political cover, and we have to help those with courage who are doing the right thing step up and do that. So whether that's a state level, whether that's at the district level, whether that's at the individual teacher level, we need to all be communicating that our students are competing in a global economy. And they're not competing down the block or in the district or even in the state for jobs. They're competing with children in India and China. And we need to have a common measuring stick. We need to level the playing field and give every student a chance to be successful. And this is easier said than done, but what we have to do collectively is we have to reward courage, not what is politically expedient, not what helps score you a few political points by grade inflation or dumbing down standards, which we've seen. We have a lot of folks showing tremendous courage, and we have to collectively make sure we keep shining a spotlight on them and encouraging others to follow suit. So that's at the teacher level, principal level, district level, state level, all across the board. We're seeing this fundamental breakthrough, and we have to do everything we can to keep that movement going forward.
Here in Washington, schools Chancellor Michelle Rhee faced tough criticism last week when she severed almost 200 teachers for performance issues. At a time when it's challenging to find quality teachers to staff inner-city schools, what can you say to teachers who face new standards for performance, and do you support Chancellor Rhee's actions?
Well, I think what happened here in D.C. a couple months ago was a breakthrough labor agreement between the district and the teachers union. I forget, 85% of teachers voted for the agreement. As part of that agreement was a teacher evaluation system. And to me, again, it's so important that we're looking at growth and gain and how much a student's improving. So the details of that, they'll work out at the local level. But the larger point to your question is, I think in our country we've had very few incentives and lots of disincentives for the hardest working and most committed teachers and principals to work in underserved communities, be that inner city urban or be that rural. And we talk so much about the achievement gap. I'm convinced the only way we close the achievement gap is by closing what I call the opportunity gap. And folks can use local resources, and we're begging them to use our resources to create a very different opportunity structure so the best teachers, the hardest working teachers and principals are attracted and stay in those communities that need the most help. And that can happen in D.C., that can happen in inner city communities around the country, that can happen in rural communities. Again, we have unprecedented resources on the table. Folks have a chance to be very, very creative and figure out what's the right local solution to getting great talent where we need it most. And if we're serious about closing the achievement gap, we will take this on in an unprecedented way.
D.C. was one of your 19 finalists in Race to the Top. Are actions such as the firings last week the sort of thing that will help D.C. with this and future competitions?
Well, I think it's a race to the top, and I don't think anyone's going to fire their way to the top. I think what D.C. is having honest conversations, and these are tough conversations change, but D.C. is having honest conversations. We're talking about the firings. D.C. is also putting huge amounts of resources on the table to reward excellence. And I think as a country, we've failed to reward excellence. We've failed to provide support in the middle. And we've failed to, those ones that were simply not working after support and mentoring, we've failed to move them on to other professions. And so where we have districts, including D.C., that are trying to be much more thoughtful, much more comprehensive, doing this in partnership with unions, rewarding excellence, supporting teachers in the middle, and having honest conversations where it's simply not working, I think we need to have more of that.
A lot of focus on education policy tends to go K through 12, but education, of course, is more and more, including college education. This questioner asks, state support for public universities is under pressure in many jurisdictions. Is the Federal Department of Education assisting at the undergrad and grad level?
I think $36 billion in Pell Grants I thought was a pretty good step in the right direction. And obviously these are tough times for not just K to 12, but higher ed. We're continuing to urge universities to find ways to contain costs in tough budget times. And I think clearly we still have the best system of higher education in the world, something we should be very, very proud of. What we need to continue to do, however, is to drive up completion rates on the higher education side. So it's not just about access, it's really about attainment. And it's pretty interesting as you look at colleges and universities, they're not too dissimilar to high schools. Some do a remarkable job of building a culture around completion and do a great job of supporting first-generation college goers and English language learners, and others, frankly, don't do a good enough job there. And something we want to continue to do is find ways to shine a spotlight on those universities that aren't just getting students in the front door, but are helping them come out the back end. And all of our work, and this is the heart of it, all of our work is simply behind that President's 2020 goal. That's our North Star of trying to lead the world in percent of college graduates. So we need to keep down tuition, we need to continue to increase access, but we have to be focused not just on access, but on completion.
Does the U.S. need more vocational education, especially when many college graduates can't find jobs?
We do. It's a great question. I'll take it at two levels. If we're serious about reducing dropout rates at the high school side, giving students a chance to work with their hands, to build their technical skills, to find apprenticeships that's going to lead to very high-paying jobs. And any of you who have paid a plumber lately know they're doing pretty well. These are great jobs. And I think this is one of the areas where it's interesting. I think in the 1960s we probably did a much better job of this as a country, and somehow we lost our way a little bit. And so I think vocational and technical education is a range of options for high school students are going to keep a lot of students engaged and involved in school and give them a reason to complete. And then beyond that,